Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm Ashley Bathgate, and I'm so glad you all came to this. I'm going to talk at you, I guess, for a little while about, my. Oops, I don't want to see just my face. I want to see all of your faces. Okay. Yeah, so I want to talk about kind of where I come from in contemporary music and my experience as a performer, collaborating with composers, commissioning music, doing this really predominantly for the last decade or more. Um, and then I also kind of want to talk a little bit about just existing in this time and what that's done for me creatively, how our brains and our spirits are kind of reacting to all of this, and just kind of what it is to be an artist, what it is to be a creator, and navigating through that. Just some thoughts that I've been having during this time, and I would love if you guys would please. I do want this to kind of be a discussion. If you have questions, just interject. I don't think it has to be. I've been talking a lot for the past few weeks, so I sort of want to hear from, the people who I'm talking at, and that would be really great. So if you have thoughts or want to sort of go on a tangent, I think that's great. Let's do that. Right. So when I was studying I started playing the cello, I guess, when I was 10, 9 or 10 in elementary school. I joined a youth orchestra. I was taking private lessons. I went to Bard, then I went to Yale. I was just studying classical music. That was what I was told I should do as a cellist. And, you know, that was all well and good. And I learned a lot and I got a lot out of it. But something for me was always missing, I guess. And I found that missing component when I left Yale, really right at the tail end of my grad school work. And then Martin Bresnik, who is a composer and professor at Yale University, approached me and he said, "Hey, I think you'd be really great for this ensemble, the Bang on a Can All Stars." Of course, I didn't know who the Bang on a Can All Stars were at that point. I was not familiar with their work. But I was hell bent on moving to New York City. No plan, no money, no nothing, no job. And I auditioned for this band, and I got in. And I remember from the get-go, like from the first moment that I walked in through those doors to audition, the audition was playing with this amazing band, and playing some really strange music. It was Michael Nyman, Conlon Nancaro, of course, Michael Gordon, David Lang, Julia Wolfe. And suddenly I just became excited about music in a way that I hadn't been before. And through my experience working with the Bang on a Can All Stars, and then of course some spin-off chamber ensembles, I have a duo with pianist Lisa Moore. We've commissioned, I think, about 12 or 13 new pieces for that duo. I had a trio with Todd. I think Todd is here, Todd Reynolds, and Vicky Chow. We commissioned a bunch of new pieces as well. I have a band that really only made one record together and can't tour because we have two double basses, called Bonjour, with Florent Gis, who's an amazing composer, playing his music, and that was a quintet. And then I started off, kind of carving a path as a soloist. I wanted to do some things on my own, and including, commissioning composers. I started off playing a lot of pieces that already existed, and specifically pieces that were kind of multi-tracked with backing tracks. I was fascinated with the idea of being a cellist on stage, but not just one voice. I could be 8 voices, I could be 12 voices. I could, use software programs like Ableton Live. I could use pedals and microphones and all of these things to kind of extend my color palette. And so that was all just really, exciting and kind of what has spurred me along and kept me going in this community, in this world, in this business, if you want to call it that. And yeah, I think the takeaway is that I found freedom in working with living composers. Now, I myself, I'm not a composer. I haven't up until now maybe considered myself a composer. I maybe took one or two classes in school, wrote one or two not so great pieces, kind of unfinished. And I've always been very insecure and and shy about that part of myself, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But by nature, I and I remember, I think the first thing I ever said that I wanted to be when people would ask me was an actor. I want to be an actor. I want to be a movie star. And somehow I was always musical from an early age, and so music made the most sense in the end. But I related a lot to that because I consider myself by nature to be an interpreter. I like to say I'm a chameleon. I have all these different hats that I put on, and I really enjoy it because I never wanted to choose just one thing to do. I know that for some people, they want to find something they specialize in. Maybe it's, like Glenn Gould and Bach, or, playing one composer, or composing only your own music, or, finding your niche, and that is wonderful. But I was always hungry for different kinds of music. I still am. I've never been able to quite settle in one place. And I enjoy being all these different characters and trying on all those different hats, I think, very much. And so it makes a lot of sense for me to be working with living composers and collaborating with them to create something, rather than being the person who is writing these things down on paper or sort of behind the scenes. So over the years, and I think any musician will tell you this, you as you get older, you develop your own tastes and maybe a want for more control, or more say, wanting to feed back and kind of share the experience. In the beginning, I thought that commissioning was really that you found composers that you liked their music, and then you raise some money and you ask them to write you a piece, and then they write you a piece and they email it to you or send it to you, and then you learn that piece and maybe you play it for them once or twice and you talk about it and then you perform it. Finito, right? And that does happen still, and it happened a lot when I was younger. But through my work, I was much more excited about working with these composers on something. And so I started to choose, number one, composers who were open to something like that, who wanted to have a dialogue, who really wanted to get in a room with me, maybe not even having an idea at first. But I've been in a lot of recent situations where I just show up. We get together, somebody's got an iPhone or a device to record, and we're just improvising and hanging out and kind of tossing ideas back and forth. One of those ideas works. I always tell the story of my experience with Michael Gordon. He just wrote me an hour-long solo piece called House Music. And I had been asking him for years to write for me, and was so excited when he finally said he had the time to do this. And I'll never forget, I showed up at his loft in Tribeca, kind of ready to sift through some ideas or, talk about what it is we're going to do. And he had absolutely no plans and no intentions of that. Which caught me off guard a little bit, and just said, well, just play for me. And we sat there, and I just really played for him for like 3 hours, just doing anything I could think of on my instrument. And I do improvise, but that's not a regular thing for me. I don't consider that a specialty by any means. So it felt very much like grabbing at at straws, you know what I mean? But the interesting thing is, like, no matter what level you're at or what your experience is, when someone asks you on the spot to start improvising, your brain starts working in a different way. You have that adrenaline going. You have that kind of maybe an eagerness to please or to find to discover, right? So you're triggered in at least I am triggered in a really positive way. And I start doing all these things I can't even sometimes recreate in the end. I mean, he wrote me an impossible piece where I did all of these things. It's documented. uh, but then I go back and you try to recreate that or repeat it or make it something that you can call upon consistently, and that's not always possible. I'm sure some of you have had that experience as well. But the great thing about it is that all of this kind of work and this discovery process really challenges me to be a better musician and better at my instrument. And it's taught me that really saying no or saying I can't, these are not part of my vocabulary whenever I can help it. And I think that applies to a lot of areas in life. So yes, this work started becoming much more collaborative. And then of course, I started learning how to use Sibelius on my own so I could edit my own parts. And, I like working with people who, like me, have a more open mind, who are flexible, who also enjoy that process and enjoy having input from a performer. Because these things, at the end of the day, whether a composer writes to your strengths or to your weaknesses, you still have to make it your own. So this piece, this interpreter of a composition, is so integral. It's so important. I mean, one would not exist without the other, and it's a really kind of delicate relationship, I think. And so I try to choose people who are like-minded when I'm commissioning. And, that is often, I've found, born of a like-minded personal relationship as well. So a lot of, like I made a record with Australian composer Kate Moore, who's living in the Netherlands. And she wrote for the All-Stars first, but really the beginning was more personal in nature. She played the cello. She loves the cello. She can't stop writing for the cello even now, like a decade later. I would wonder how many cello pieces she's written. But we just hit it off personally, I think, and spiritually, if anything. And that was kind of the seed of our collaboration. And then we started, it would be a lot of back and forth overseas through email, through Skype. A couple times a year, maybe I'd be touring in Europe, or I would be where she is, or she would be in New York where I was, and we would get a chance to work together. But out of this came a really beautiful collaborative experience, I think, because both of us were open to the other contributing and shaping something together. So she wrote all the notes, and most of it is it's very specifically notated. There's not a lot of improvisation or anything like that. But I have to, sometimes it's not always easy to like be convincing in what you're interpreting or playing. Sometimes I have to dig deeper in myself for it, or I might be technically hung up on something and I have to really make it my own, or I have to develop. She had these sounds that she could do, and she doesn't play cello. She didn't study that instrument in school. It was kind of a very basic training. She plays more now, but at the time she didn't even own a cello, but she knew exactly the sounds that she wanted. She had these extended techniques, and I spent hours just sort of trial and error and not really getting the sound that she wanted. I remember her saying, well, yes, but not quite, and it's more like this, and she would try to show me, but in showing me, also couldn't execute it quite right. And so then by working together on it, we finally arrived at, for example, this kind of vibrato trill, placing the bow at the bridge, which is like ponticello, and so you get a little bit of a distortion sound, but you also get all sorts of partials and overtones that are ringing. And the trill, this like flutter trill that's happening, is also like breaking up the sound and making a very shimmery sound. So, that's one example, I guess, of something that we really created together and then became this very special thing that's in a lot of her pieces. So, yeah, and it was the same thing with the Sleeping Giant Composer Collective. These are 6 guys that I went to school with at Yale: Ted Hearn, Timo Andrus, Christopher Cerrone, Jacob Cooper, Robert Honstein. Did I say Ted Hearn? I always forget one. I always forget one person. But anyway, if I miss one, shout it out. In any case, Andrew Norman, that's it. And I've played all of their music individually since we were in grad school, and I knew them, we hung out, and then I thought of this idea. I was kind of rediscovering the Bach suites, and I said, and I had heard also Philip Glass's songs and poems that he wrote for Wendy Sutter. Another like kind of magical collaborative relationship, born of a romantic one. And I just thought those songs and poems as something contemporary were magical. They sounded beautiful, and they echoed for me the Bach suites in the same way that the Britten suites for solo cello do. And I just became curious. I was like, well, we gotta, like, there has to be more out there on a larger scale for cellists, and specifically, what about cellists who are using Ableton Live, who are using electronics, or they're looping, or they're live processing, all of that. And so they wrote me some really cool pieces. It's a suite. It's called Ash. It's my latest record that's out there for sale on Bandcamp and all the platforms to stream if you want to hear it. But it was a very personal experience, working with each of them and building something from the ground up. And I think from that, and that began maybe 2015, I think, was when we started to work on it. And it took years. I mean, it was like building the piece, working on the piece, having a lot of it turned in at the last minute, like a week before the premiere happened at LPR. Okay, so doing the premiere, great, but then everybody wants to make tweaks. I want to make tweaks. I have to like grow with it, right? That's the other thing, is like I'm so into, and I've been saying this a lot in all the various Zoom experiences that I've been having, how I'm so into the process now of developing it. I think when I was in school, it was so much about perfecting something. So it was like having perfect technique and execution, learning a piece, memorizing the piece. You have all this, of course, a luxury of time to learn and memorize a program. These pieces were mostly, Brahms, Beethoven, Bach. So they existed. There was a precedent. There was a way that, I was asked almost to interpret them, or expected to interpret them. And you polish it up and you make it sound great, and then you perform it once or twice, and then it's over. So that was my mindset in the beginning. And then through this process of working with living composers and commissioning music for me to play, I was free. I was free to get away from the perfection of everything and the expectation that it be a certain way. I was the first person interpreting it ever. There was no recording that existed. An ultimate freedom in how I would portray it. And a freedom then when I would record it also, like always having the first kind of right to have a commercial recording of the work. And yeah, I guess I just found that incredibly freeing, and I was really excited about working that way. And so, where was I? Yeah, it took years. It was like that, and then we went into the studio. They made more changes. We edited things, heavily. The music, even the parts that existed have been like heavily edited and changed over the years. Finally, it's published. I'm really excited now that like other people, other cellists can play this music. It's out there. You can go hear it, you can go play it. I can't, I'm excited now to here 5 years later to see other cellists. I've seen a few of them do Jacob Cooper's piece Leyline. I want to hear other people's interpretations because this is also part of what's fun about commissioning music is that then it becomes something of the world. Like it hopefully enters the repertoire and you get to see like how other people will interpret it and how they will spin off your original interpretation of it. Um, Maybe, does anyone have any questions so far or comments or come on, talk to me. You want me to just keep going on and on and on?
I think that means yes.
I think that means yes. Okay. All right.
Ashley, I have a question. This is Bill Curris.
Hi.
I saw you at Le Poison Rouge in Greenwich Village performing with Lisa Moore.
Uh-huh.
It was a American Civil Liberties Union fundraiser.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And you pulled out a second bow from the back of your outfit, played with two bows, and was singing simultaneously.
Yeah, well, I do whatever people ask me to do, right? So, yeah, yeah, I guess that was probably Jacob Cooper's piece that you saw, which has me like playing with both
Yes.
bows, sawing away. I forget what I was singing. I don't think I'm singing in that piece, but I'm definitely singing in other pieces. Yeah, well, did you have any questions about that, or you
Well,
thought it was
I,
cool, or
I'm segueing. You mentioned Wendy Sutter, and I
yeah.
had seen her a couple of times. I saw her with Philip Glass when Michael Dorff opened the City Winery in downtown
Hmm.
Manhattan. And then I saw her 15 years later, and while she was talking to the audience, she had mentioned she was a member of the All Stars as well. Were the two of you in the All Stars at the same time?
No, no, she was my predecessor. So the original cellist was Maya Beiser. And then Wendy came in, I think for maybe 6 to 8 years. I don't know the exact number. And then there were some subs for a couple of years, and then I joined. And I've left now, so there will be another cellist. It's a magical chair.
Well, I was thrilled to learn that both of you were in the same organization at one part of your career. Thank you for that.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the thing is like I'm so thankful to, I mean, not only the cellists of Bang on a Can, but it is a community and it's a small world. I mean, we know a lot of people within it and we work with these people and they are paving the way. I mean, Maya was doing multi-tracking when multi-tracking was first a thing, when you were still putting an actual CD into a CD player to play it, and they both have commissioned so many works. I think Wendy, it was the songs and poems, but also maybe two cello concertos that Philip wrote for her, and several other works. So it's great. It's like that's how I started. I mean, that's how I got any courage whatsoever to think that I could go on stage by myself and do concerts. Like that didn't feel like a natural thing to me. I've always been more of a chamber musician and I really do love it because I love the call and response and the kind of energy that's exchanged on stage between other people. But because of these cellists and other people, um, and Todd Reynolds, like I remember first getting to know him and his CD came out Outerborough and I still watch this guy with my jaw on the floor. Um, like watching him make all sorts of sounds and surround sound, and he's like pressing buttons and using his feet and playing the violin, and I'm like, what is like, how, he's just doing, this is a one man show, right? Or a one woman show. And I think I just got really excited about even being able to do that and having the technology to be able to do that. So
Isn't it
anyway, yeah.
isn't it intimidating enough to worrying about the condition of your cello, but then on top of that, compound it with electronic equipment in a venue that
Yes.
you're not particularly familiar with, and relying on the technicians to helping you to cook everything up properly?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I would say that 90% of my stage anxiety now is like, will this work? Will this crash? Will this break? Will my sound engineer know what I want the sound? I mean, that is tough. I think it's a luxury, and in the All Stars, we were spoiled to have two sound engineers, Jody Elf and Andrew Cotton, who would travel with us, who knew that music. If you And it is very much a duo. So if you are an instrumentalist, uh, working with sound and amplification, then you're in a duo with your sound engineer. And it is, I mean, that is a relationship of trust if I've ever if I've ever felt that way. And it's, yeah, I think it's scary, like when you don't know the person and you're walking into a venue that you've never set foot in for the first time, and then you're working with someone um, who doesn't know the music. Sometimes they don't even read music, and they're trying to, they're like, oh, I get a lot of, oh yeah, 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 I've done this for years and years, like bands and guitars and this. I was like, yeah, but have you done like a cellist playing really weird new music with tracks that are like not compressed and they're all over the place dynamically, and I kind of know what I'm doing, but there's a lot that I don't know what I'm doing. So it becomes really difficult, and I think having a sound engineer that you would travel with is another, that's another whole other seminar, I guess, of a collaborative experience, is the one with your sound engineer.
Thank
But
you very
definitely,
much.
I feel like I just got to the place in life where I had eliminated most of my nerves and stage fright, just playing the cello and feeling like, okay, I think I've got like a good grip on this instrument, and a good grip on interpreting new music. And then I complicated my life further, which I'm always doing, and like made it even harder.
I listened to you on Facebook. You're talking about some technology, and you've tried connecting things and what kind of units should you use, and it takes the wind out of me that the cello isn't enough a challenge. Now you're an electronics wizard.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm a wizard, but yes, well, and definitely during this time, and I've been working a lot with Todd on this, and he's kind of farther along than I am, but we've been I mean, we're performing from home now, right? I'm in my bedroom right now. So I had to, and I kind of dove immediately into it, where I all of our gigs got canceled, and my gigs are canceled pretty much through the fall too. So it's like, well, what do we do? I got to keep making money. I got to keep making music. So yeah, I make a little stage, right? I start learning about lighting. I didn't have the right lighting until till a couple weeks ago, thinking, oh, that's not that important. It's actually more important than the camera you're using. So then it's having external cameras and capture cards and microphones. None of this equipment did I have. None of it did I know how to use. I'm still learning how to use it. And it's actually been great for me, just as a way to, I feel like I'm educating myself. I'm back in school somewhat, like learning all of these new skills. And so it's breathing like life into a time that might be, could be spent um, doing nothing, or like, being distracted. So I've found a way to like keep it going. And now I'm figuring out this way of like how to give a quality performance online, whether you're streaming or pre-recording something. I've done a few of those in the past couple months. Yeah. So any other questions about
Yeah,
that or?
Ashley, there are a couple other questions
Hmm.
from the chat, and one of them ties right into what you were just talking about. Sam asks, Ashley, how have you adapted your approach to composer-performer collaboration since COVID? What are the differences between collaborating virtually compared with meeting in person?
Right. Hi, Sam. Well, we're collaborating, so I think, well, I've done so much virtually anyway. It doesn't feel that different. Well, I think it's very nice that you can get in a room, one-on-one physically, when you can, but even that was always hard to do pre-COVID. I mean, because everybody's spread out, they're in different countries or different states, they're very busy. So it was always hard to meet up in person to begin with, and I think most of the collaborative stuff was done virtually. So that didn't feel like a stretch or anything too unfamiliar to me. Um, and now I think, when I have, you guys are writing me some new pieces this summer, and I'm really excited about that. And I feel like we're just going to figure out the way to work on that digitally. The one thing that has been a struggle is that if you don't have a microphone or the proper equipment to represent sound in a decent way, as I lean into my microphone, um, that's tricky, right? Like I've taught some lessons to cellists and also had to demonstrate, and it's really difficult. Like if you're just playing into laptop speakers, you can't hear like you don't have dynamic range. Zoom cuts out all sorts of, frequencies, and the sound quality is poor. So I feel like I'm set up to be okay for that, but like other people who might not be able to afford that equipment or don't have access to it, or hello, it's all sold out online, which it is. uh it becomes a challenge, I think, to navigate, like, well, what if I'm playing for a composer and I don't have that proper equipment? I'm sort of in trouble because they don't know how I sound. The other option has always been to pre-record something. So like even if you record into your iPhone, uh not live, but like using just the recording device, it's a better option than doing it in real time. I never understood why when people would want to do Skype sessions with me, like without having that, which I didn't. And I was like, why do you want to do that to yourself? Like you're just going to be so unhappy with how I'm playing your music, and I'm going to be so unhappy that you're unhappy hearing it. Like, so I always avoided that kind of thing at all costs. In any case, I think that's, yeah, how have you adapted your approach? Well, that's it. We're going to figure it out. I think this is, um, working with you and working with the other composers is going to be kind of a deep dive and a first, at just going through this time period and working up some new pieces. And again, like I haven't done yet a live stream performance. I did with the Bang and a Can marathon, but it was like 10 minutes. I haven't done like an hour long concert. So I think that's my goal, is to like learn these new pieces and then do something live that's of really high quality. And then
And maybe
Jeremy,
we should
right?
just talk about
Mm,
that, Ashley, just in terms of what that project is, because that goes to the core of what you're talking about and what the festival's about too. So, Ashley was going to be our guest artist for this season of the next festival, and she was going to solo with the orchestra. And we all know what happened with the whole idea of live performance. So then Ashley has been so generous with her time, and she is going to be uh, playing brand new pieces that our student composers are writing for her. So they're in the process of developing this whole collaborative project, all working with Ashley, workshopping the pieces, and so that's exactly what our composers are doing with you right now.
yeah. And we had a meeting, which was kind of where the idea for this today came from, where we were just sort of discussing, like, well, what will these pieces look like, and how do you write? As a composer, what are the differences? What am I interested in? That brings it a little bit back to the topic. What I was going to say is that I think you do have to have this preliminary discussion It 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 can work. I listen to your music. I like your music. You listen to my playing. You get to know my playing. You write me a piece. Great. But I think it's nicer to actually, because, everybody's aesthetics and tastes and wants change, throughout their life and throughout their career. And so something that I was doing a lot of 5 years ago, I might not want to do a lot of right now. Like, I'm not doing as much multi-tracking anymore. I'm more curious about even some like more extended techniques and acoustic works, live processing, like different challenges. So we have that discussion, well, what is it that you want to do? Because ultimately, and this was something I was going to say too, is like, it's so much about, as I get older, I just realize like everything is about your instinct and your feeling and like the vibe you have with people, and speaking up, for what you want, like saying, I don't want to do this. I do want to do this. I'm open to this idea. And while I don't say no and I don't say I can't, but I think if you have these discussions and you get on the same page and on the same wavelength, then you have increased your odds of succeeding, at this collaborative effort and at this piece and at this performance, because you want to do things you want to do. Like you want to be excited I want to be excited to work on this piece. I want to like the person I'm working on it with. I want to feel like we have a dialogue and we have this communication going where we can try things and work on it together. So that was really important to have that preliminary discussion, I think, of like, well, what is it we're going to do? What's the time frame? When is this going to happen? What's our goal for a performance time? And that's it. It's like knowing enough about yourself to be able to speak up for that, and vice versa with a composer, and then seeing if you align enough to make that collaboration happen. And I think more often than performers, we just want to please a lot, and I'm sure composers feel this way too. It's like we want to feel that what you give us is something we can succeed at and do well. And so then comes in the conversation of all the little things. I mean, it's like how the part is written, the instructions, like, do you want this to be free? Do you want me to, is it a David Lang score where there's no dynamics and no markings at all? And I'm like sort of free to float in that space. Or is it hyper notated and you have very specific ideas of how you want it to sound? Like all of this necessary up front, right? Like to kind of just know what you're diving into is really important. And I want to talk a little bit about something else. I think we have a hard stop right at 2:30 because there's another thing, right, Peter?
Right.
But before I move on,
there was one other question in the chat too, which I think is also really interesting. Have you ever commissioned a work that in the end you just couldn't connect with, that you weren't able to find a way to make your own?
Never that I haven't been able to make it my own. I feel that was always the thing. I feel like that everybody has gifts, everybody has talents. I think that's one of my talents. I always felt like I could just take any piece of music and make it my own and like really do it convincingly. So I've never felt that. But yes, there are some works that I haven't connected with. And most of those works were from a younger time, a younger self, where I didn't ask those questions and I didn't speak up for myself. And I kind of blindly chose and didn't describe, what it is I was looking for at that time, or what was speaking to my heart at that time. Also asking a composer, where are you at? I mean, you can't always approach everyone and be like, so I want to commission you to write a solo cello piece, and expect that a composer is going to be like, yeah, totally. Like I want nothing more than to write a solo cello piece for you right now. Like, not, you might not be in that headspace. You might not be there. And so sometimes I'm asking the question as well, I'm looking for a solo piece, but what are you interested in right now? What subject matter are you interested? What's like piquing your curiosity? What are you deep diving into? Does that speak to what I'm deep diving into? Um, and sometimes I'll get back, well, I'm actually, I would love to write for cello and piano, or I would love to write for piano trio or cello and percussion. Or sometimes I make that decision ahead of time where I think, well, it would be great to have a solo piece, but you know what? I think this person would like write a kick-ass uh, cello percussion piece. And so I lead with that. You know, you kind of have to vibe that with each other. It's like, what are we interested in? What do we want to do? So the works that didn't speak with me were often, you know, I contributed to that end by not asking the right questions and kind of not being upfront about what I was interested, or sometimes not knowing what I was interested in. You know, you're in your 20s, and I was kind of like just figuring things out for the first time, and uh, and sometimes you listen to a composer's music, and then they write you something completely different. And you know, again, like we didn't have the dialogue, we didn't talk about it, or I chose a collaborative experience with maybe a less flexible, um, you know, like I know that if I commissioned, I was gonna say a big name, but I'm actually not gonna say any big names. But let's say there are a few big names in mind who I have on my wish list to have them write me a solo piece. I know damn well I'm not gonna go up to them and be like, I have no money. Maybe I have a few $1,000s to commission you. Will you write this piece? And by the way, I want to have like weekly Zooms on building this up with you. And they're gonna be like, are you for real? No, I don't have time for that. You know what I mean? So you sort of have to negotiate some. I mean, that would be great if they did, but there is some reality, like there's being realistic too, of knowing that some of your bigger asks, you might not have the same flexibility or luxury of collaborating in that way. And so I actually feel like I often prefer working with my peers and people who are my own age and people who are kind of at the same place in their career, in their life, where again, like-minded, like we really want to we want to do a deep dive, we want to discover this together, as opposed to just like, cool, you came up with the money and I'll write you this piece, right? Any other questions before I move on? Okay, so the other thing that kind of came to my head yesterday, which is a little bit of a departure, I think, from the topic, but also not, is that, you know, during this time, I think I've been thinking a lot about what it is to be an artist and what it is to be a creator. And I said earlier that I don't consider myself a composer, but, or I don't consider myself maybe always a, I love Diane Keaton has a quote in her book that she wrote. She says, Al Pacino is an artist. I am artistic. And I thought about that for a while, and I thought, yeah, I think I'm artistic. You know, like I don't always eat, sleep, and breathe it. I don't always see the big picture. I'm not necessarily like creating everything. I'm interpreting, or I'm like dipping in and out. But then I thought, well, I don't need to limit myself in that way. And I remember watching, which I think Peter is going to post these links, but like there's a video, it's a very short video that you can watch after this, where Laurie Anderson talks about being, you know, it's advice for the young, and talks about being a multimedia artist. And I love, she says, multimedia artist, what is that? That's a load of crap. That whole term is like ridiculous. Like, what does that mean? It means nothing, but it's a great way of not pigeonholing yourself or labeling yourself. And I think I've become all about that, especially during this pandemic, of like, well, I've been playing the cello for what, like 20 something years. Um, I am curious about other things. I have other passions. I have other desires. Why do I have to limit myself to being an interpreter of new music? Can we have, Mayani is here. Hi, Mayani. We are working on a project, a new David Lang piece based on the poetry of Gertrude Stein, composition as explanation. That's the other thing I'm going to have Peter post for you guys. If you want to read through it, I recommend reading through it 10 or 11 times, and you still might not understand what the hell she's talking about. I still don't quite understand it. But we're doing this with Eighth Blackbird and an amazing director named Anne Bogart. And we had these Zoom sessions. I forget if it was last week or the week before. I don't know what day it is anymore. But and it, Matthew was emailing us and he was like, so we're going to just meet like 3 hours a day. I was like, we're going to have 3-hour Zoom sessions in my bedroom, and I'm not going to play my cello. Like I was kind of down about it, and it ended up being like one of the most amazing experiences I think I've ever had. Here I am, I'm working with this incredible director. I'm getting free acting lessons. I'm getting held by the hand and spoon-fed the meaning of Gertrude Stein, who I have no idea about. We're reading through this text. It is just like life-giving and so inspiring. Everybody left those meetings just kind of like revived. I started writing poetry. I mean, I've never written a poem in my life. Like, other than like the ones that rhyme where you try to just be really cute. I was like writing, in this other voice, like shit was like coming down from the sky. I'm like, what's happening? I need to write. And I've been journaling, and I've been writing like love letters and sending them, which you shouldn't. And like all of this stuff has been going on, and it's had very little to do with my cello actually lately. And while at first I felt really guilty about that and kind of bad about that, I actually started to embrace it. And I was like, I can write and I can compose, and I could write some music, and I can stretch, like spread my wings a little bit here, because we have this. It is a gift to have this time right now, right? And sort of, I'm not traveling all the time. My mind is more focused, or at least it's more receptive. I feel very receptive to the world right now. And of course, with what's going on, I mean, this is, what are we going to do? I mean, if you're not out in the streets protesting, or you're not, I mean, we're reading, or we're critically thinking about things. We're challenging ourselves. We're recognizing a need for change. And certainly, like, it's a call to duty, I think. And artists have that responsibility. And we always answer it. Isn't that funny? I feel like artists, we are always answering that call. We are always there. We are always creating. We are always responding. We are reflecting society. We are reflecting the times. And you'll kind of get this from, I might read you if we have time, like 1 or 2 passages, but Gertrude Stein's talking about composition, not just musical, but like any kind of composition. It's a reflection of the times. It's present moment, a continuous present, right? It's like being, and you don't even know you're in it. And it's not, and it's rarely accepted when it's new, right? I mean, we used the Rite of Spring as an example. It was booed. It was nobody appreciated it. Now it's like it's in the canon. It's like one of the greatest works of art we've ever seen. I mean, so this is the thing, is like, you have no concept, you have no idea what is going to be successful and what is not going to be successful, what makes sense, what doesn't, what is art, what isn't art. I mean, all of this stuff, really, it's like noise that we have to tune out and like actually live in the present moment. And not, I think I've just been telling myself not to worry so much about what I am, like what kind of artist I am, or if my art is good. My poetry might be shit, but like, who cares? Maybe when I'm dead, that poem they'll be, oh, and she wrote great poetry. Like, who knows? So all of these things, it's like, you have to have this kind of confidence and conviction, and a way of tuning out the noise and like the commentary of like society, who says something is good or bad. It's like all you really need is resilience and like the forward motion to keep going and to keep creating and to be fearless about it and to not worry what other people think. Now, this, and we're running out of time. I hate it. I need more time. I talk too much. So you need this. It's running parallel to like the need to pay your bills and to like, you know, as much as I might love to be a poet or write music, what am I good at? I'm good at playing the cello. I've spent time on this craft. Like I've really honed it. I've spent time with new music. So yes, there's this other beast of like, I need to make a living and I need to do what I'm good at. And I sort of, so it's a struggle, right? I think artists always like struggle between these different hats that we wear. But I think there's room for it all to exist, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And right now, having this gift of time, I'm exploring other ways to be an artist, to create, to think, and absorb, being a sponge, just reading. And I asked for that time. I asked for that time so much where I like could just not have to be on autopilot, not be traveling all the time, not be scattered in my thoughts, where I can just sit down and think, because I'm not going to play, make, do anything worth anything if my brain is like mush and flatlined. If I'm not absorbing, if I'm not reading, if I'm not tuning into what's happening around me. Well, it's just stale, you know, and I felt like I was going a bit stale. And it's funny, like my parents are a little bit, they're like a little worried. They're like, well, you haven't touched your cello and what's going on? And like, is everything okay? I'm like, actually, yeah, it's fucking great right now. like everything is, all the synapses are firing, you know, and I like, there are other explosions happening right in my brain. And I feel like it's so important to just be of the world and to allow yourself to be a sponge and to not limit yourself, to not say, well, I'm not a composer, or I'm not a painter, I'm not a writer, I only do this thing. No, you do all things. And if you are an artist, if you have that in your blood and in your nature, you're a creator. So why not just say, I create, you know, like, and not be worried about what people think. I don't know if we have time for me to read. Does anyone? I'd rather hear your questions if you have them, or comments. You can read the Gertrude Stein at your own peril. Silence.
Maybe they'll be inspired by a question from the Gertrude Stein.
Okay, I'll read one passage. I'm going to read it out of there. Okay. Those who are creating the modern composition authentically are naturally only of importance when they are dead, because by that time the modern composition, having become past, is classified, and the description of it is classical. That is the reason why the creator of the new composition in the arts is an outlaw until he is a classic. There is hardly a moment in between, and it is really too bad, very much too bad, naturally, for the creator, but also very much too bad for the enjoyer. They all really would enjoy the created so much better just after it has been made than when it is already a classic. But it is perfectly simple that there is no reason why the contemporaries should see, because it would not make any difference as they lead their lives in the new composition anyway, and as everyone is naturally indolent, why naturally they don't see. It is so very much more exciting and satisfactory for everybody if one can have contemporaries, if all one's contemporaries could be one's contemporaries. There is almost not an interval. And then I'll skip ahead a little bit. Of course it is beautiful, but first all beauty in it is denied, and then all the beauty of it is accepted. If everyone were not so indolent, they would realize that beauty is beauty even when it is irritating and stimulating, not only when it is accepted and classic. Of course, it is extremely difficult, nothing more so, than to remember back to its not being beautiful once it has become beautiful. This makes it so much more difficult to realize its beauty when the work is being refused, and prevents everyone from realizing that they were convinced that beauty was denied once the work is accepted. Automatically, with the acceptance of the time sense comes the recognition of the beauty, and once the beauty is accepted, the beauty never fails anyone. So if you understood that, good for you. But I think you can get an idea of what she's saying. And you know, I was inspired just to hear that she wrote this, like she would write at night, through the night. And it was like stream of consciousness mostly. It was not edited. She just wrote, a self-proclaimed genius. And then her girlfriend in the morning, when she would go off to bed, would like take her writings and kind of type them up. And this is something that just, you know, came to her. I mean, like, it's amazing.
Wow. That's great. And I think it's a great way to leave off today with some inspiration and something to chew on too. So thanks to everybody who tuned in today. And thanks so much to Ashley. It's such a gift to be able to spend some time with you and be inspired.
Thank you. Yeah.
So
Thanks for having me. Thanks for listening.
Great. Hope to see everybody back in a couple hours for the continuation of our New Music Nerd Day at the next Festival of Emerging Artists. We got Jack Quartet and Anne Leilua Lanzalotti coming up.
Yeah, I want to know how to play in tune. I think Jack is going to tell us how to play in tune. I've always wanted to know this.
2 hours, guaranteed. Your money back for the free event. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody. Take good care. Bye-bye.